in the heart of New Mexico's rugged landscape, where ancient mesas rise like silent guardians against endless skies. Two worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way. The year was 1952, and the winds of change were sweeping across the American Southwest, carrying with them stories of courage that would echo through generations. This is the story of Ayanana. Let me correct that, this is the story of Kaya Blackhorse, a young Apache woman whose spirit burned as bright as the desert sun, and Thomas Mitchell, a lonely rancher whose heart had grown as weathered as the land he worked. What began as a moment of fierce survival would become a testament to the power of understanding, respect, and the bridges we build across the chasms of difference. If you're ready to discover how a single act of courage changed lives forever, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this story will show you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is see the humanity in someone others have taught you to fear. The fire that started everything. October morning sun cast long shadows across the Sangre de Cristo Mountains as Kaya Blackhorse made her way through the pinyon pines, her moccasins silent on the frost-covered ground. At 19, she moved with the grace of someone who had learned the land's secrets from childhood, her grandmother's teachings alive in every careful step. Kaya wasn't supposed to be this far from the reservation. The boundaries set by the Bureau of Indian Affairs were clear, and crossing them meant trouble. But her grandmother, Ayana, lay dying, and the old woman had whispered about a sacred spring hidden in these mountains, water that had healed their people for generations before the white man's maps divided the earth into mine and yours. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of juniper and the distant promise of snow. Kaya pulled her woolen shawl tighter, her dark hair braided with small turquoise beads that caught the light like captured sky. She had been walking since before dawn, following the old trails her grandfather had described in stories that seemed more like dreams. But she wasn't alone in these mountains. Thomas Mitchell had been tracking the mountain lion for 3 days. The big cat had taken 2 of his calves, and with winter approaching, he couldn't afford to lose any more livestock. At 34, Thomas had been working this ranch for over a decade, ever since his father's death had left him with more land than he knew what to do with, and a solitude that had settled into his bones like the high desert cold. The ranch sprawled across 800 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving land in northern New Mexico. Thomas knew every ridge, every hidden canyon, every place where water gathered after the summer rains. He knew the silence of pre-dawn mornings, and the way the light turned the sandstone cliffs to gold at sunset. What he didn't know was how to fill the empty spaces in his life that seemed to grow larger with each passing year. His rifle rested in the crook of his arm as he followed the cat's tracks through a maze of boulders and scrub oak. The tracks were fresh, probably from the night before, and they led toward a narrow canyon he rarely visited. The walls rose steeply on both sides, creating a natural corridor that trapped sound and amplified every footstep. That's when he heard it, low growl that seemed to come from the stone itself. The mountain lion had cornered something at the far end of the canyon, and Thomas quickened his pace, thinking perhaps he'd found the cat with fresh prey. But as he rounded a massive boulder, the scene that greeted him stopped him cold. A young Apache woman stood with her back against the canyon wall, a burning branch held high in her hands like a weapon. The mountain lion crouched 20 feet away, its muscles coiled, tail lashing as it sized up this unexpected prey. The woman's eyes were fierce, unafraid, and as Thomas watched in amazement, she swung the firebrand in a wide arc, the flames hissing and crackling in the dry air. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down fear before. "I see you, Tiasi Nadlishi. I am not easy prey." The mountain lion's ears flattened against its head, and it took a step back, but Thomas could see the calculation in its yellow eyes. The cat was weighing its options, and hunger was a powerful motivator. Thomas raised his rifle, but something made him pause. The woman sensed his presence and turned slightly, her dark eyes meeting his for a heartbeat. In that moment, he saw not fear, but a fierce determination that took his breath away. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was fighting her own battle. The mountain lion chose that moment to spring. The crack of Thomas's rifle echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, and the big cat dropped mid-lip, its body hitting the ground with a heavy thud just 6 feet from where the woman stood. The sudden silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft crackling of the dying firebrand. Kaya lowered the burning branch slowly, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She looked at the dead mountain lion, then at the white rancher, who had appeared like a ghost from the rocks. Her grandmother's warnings echoed in her mind, Be careful of the white man's help. It always comes with a price. But this man didn't look like the Indian agents or the town merchants who spoke to her people with false smiles and cold eyes. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his hands calloused from honest work. And when he looked at her, she saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. That was ... Thomas started, then stopped, searching for words. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Kaya studied him carefully, noting the way he kept his rifle pointed at the ground, the way he maintained a respectful distance. Most white men would have assumed she needed saving. This one had waited to see if she could save herself. You could have missed, she said finally, her English clear but accented with the musical cadence of her native tongue. Thomas shook his head. I don't miss, but I almost didn't shoot. You had that cat thinking twice. A ghost of a smile touched the corners of Kaya's mouth. My grandmother taught me that fire is life. All creatures respect it, even the hungry ones. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She is dying. The words came out before Kaya could stop them, and she was surprised by the pain that accompanied them. She hadn't meant to share this with a stranger, especially a white stranger. Thomas heard the grief in her voice and felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. I'm sorry, he said simply. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two people from different worlds brought together by circumstance and a dead mountain lion. The October wind whistled through the canyon, stirring the ashes of the firebrand at Kaya's feet. I should go, she said, though something in her voice suggested she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to. Wait, Thomas said, and when she looked at him questioningly, he continued, that spring you're looking for, it's about a half-mile north of here, past the twin boulders that look like sleeping giants. Kaya's eyes widened. You know about the spring? My grandfather told me about it, said it was sacred to your people. He always told me to leave it be, show respect. Thomas hesitated, then added, if your grandmother needs that water, you should have it. For a long moment, Kaya said nothing. Then she nodded once, a gesture that carried more weight than words. Thank you. As she turned to go, Thomas called out, what's your name, Kaya? She replied without turning around. Kaya Blackhorse. Thomas Mitchell and Kaya. She paused. If you ever need anything, my ranch is just over that ridge. The one with the lightning-struck cottonwood. She disappeared into the shadows between the rocks, leaving Thomas alone with the dead mountain lion and the strange feeling that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. As he field-dressed the cat and prepared to drag it back to his ranch, Thomas found himself thinking about the young woman's eyes, fierce and unafraid, but also sad, with a grief that seemed too large for someone so young. He thought about the way she had wielded that firebrand, not with desperate panic but with the controlled fury of someone who had learned to fight for everything she held dear. Most of all, he thought about the way she had looked at him when he offered to help, not with suspicion or fear, but with a careful evaluation that suggested she was used to measuring the worth of people's words against their actions. Brave, he thought, as he began the long trek home. That's what she is. Brave. When water becomes sacred 3 days later. Thomas was mending fence line when he saw the smoke. It rose in a thin, gray column from the direction of the sacred spring, and his first thought was wildfire. October in New Mexico was dry season, when a single spark could consume thousands of acres. He dropped his tools and ran for his truck, but as he drove toward the smoke, he realized it was too controlled, too deliberate to be an accident. Someone had built a fire, someone who knew what they were doing. Thomas parked his truck at the base of the trail leading to the spring and climbed on foot, his heart pounding with an anxiety he couldn't name. The smoke grew thicker as he approached, and through the trees, he could see the glow of flames. But when he reached the clearing around the spring, what he found wasn't destruction, it was ceremony. Yes, ma'am, Thomas replied, grinning at her commanding tone. In the months since her grandmother's funeral, their partnership had evolved into something deeper than either of them had expected. They had become collaborators, friends, and something more, though neither had yet found the words to define exactly what that something was. The cultural center had been Kaya's idea, but Thomas had provided the space, the initial funding, and the bridge to the white community that made it possible. Together, they had created something unprecedented, a place where Apache culture could be shared with respectful visitors while remaining true to its sacred roots. The delegation from the tribal council will be here soon, Kaya said, checking the clock on the wall. Are you nervous? Terrified, Thomas admitted. What if they don't approve? What if they think we're exploiting their culture? Then we'll listen to their concerns and make changes, Kaya said calmly. This isn't about us, Thomas. It's about preserving something precious for future generations. The sound of cars approaching made them both look up. Through the window, they could see a small convoy of vehicles making its way up the dusty road. To the ranch, the tribal council delegation had arrived. Thomas felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. These men and women would determine whether their project could continue, whether the dream they had built together would survive the scrutiny of those who had the most right to judge it. The delegation was led by Robert Geronimo, a distant relative of the famous Apache leader and one of the most respected voices on the tribal council. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair braided in traditional style and eyes that seemed to see everything. With him were 3 other council members and 2 tribal elders, whose approval would be crucial. "Yeah, Robert said, greeting them in the traditional way as they entered the cultural center. "Yeah, Kaya replied, then switched to Apache to formally introduce Thomas and explain the purpose of their visit. Thomas stood quietly, understanding none of the words but reading the body language carefully. The delegation moved through the space slowly, examining every artifact, every display, every explanation card that Kaya had carefully crafted to provide context without revealing sacred knowledge. After nearly an hour of inspection, Robert addressed Thomas directly. "You are the grandson of Robert Mitchell." "Yes, sir. Your grandfather was a good man. He understood respect. But understanding and practicing are different things. Tell me why you believe you should be trusted with our culture." Thomas had prepared for this question, but now that the moment had arrived, his rehearsed answers seemed inadequate. Instead, he found himself speaking from the heart. "I don't know if I should be trusted," he said honestly. "I'm still learning what that trust means. But I know that Kaya's grandmother saw something in me worth saving. She called me Zeso, one who sees clearly. I'm trying to live up to that name." "And what do you see when you look at this place?" Robert asked. Thomas glanced around the room, taking in the careful displays, the respectful presentation of artifacts, the way Kaya had managed to create education without exploitation. "I see a bridge," he said finally. "A place where understanding can grow, where fear can become respect, where the wisdom of your people can be shared without being diminished." "Pretty words," said one of the elders, a woman whose face was deeply lined with age and wisdom. "But what do you gain from this bridge?" Thomas considered the question. "I gain the chance to be part of something bigger than myself. I gain the friendship of people who have taught me to see the world differently. I gain the opportunity to honor the memory of a woman who showed me what real courage looks like." The elder nodded slowly. "And what do you lose?" "My isolation," Thomas said without hesitation. "My small view of the world. The comfort of thinking I understood everything worth understanding." Robert turned to Kaya. "And you, granddaughter, what do you gain from this partnership?" "I gain the chance to keep my grandmother's promise," Kaya said, "to be the bridge between worlds, to make sure our stories survive and our wisdom is not lost. I gain the resources to teach our young people their heritage, while also preparing them for the modern world." "And what do you lose?" "Nothing," Kaya said firmly, "because this is not about giving away our culture. It's about sharing the parts of it that can heal a broken world." The delegation conferred among themselves in Apache, their voices low but animated. Thomas watched Kaya's face for clues about how the conversation was going, but her expression remained carefully neutral. Finally, Robert spoke. "We have concerns," he said. "We worry about sacred knowledge being treated as entertainment. We worry about our culture being turned into a commodity for tourists who want to feel better about themselves without actually changing anything." "Those are valid concerns," Kaya said. "That's why we've been so careful about what we share and how we share it. The sacred remains sacred. What we offer here is education, not appropriation. Robert walked to one of the displays, a collection of traditional Apache tools and weapons. These are replicas, he observed. Yes, Kaya confirmed. The originals remain with the families who owned them, or in our tribal museum. We don't believe in taking sacred objects from their proper homes. Could Robert examine the information cart beside the display, and this explanation it teaches about our history without revealing the spiritual significance that should remain within our community. That was the goal, Thomas said. To create understanding without crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. The eldest woman in the group, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. I am Mary Crowfeather, she said. I knew Black Horse. We were girls together, learned the old ways together. She spoke of you both before she died. Thomas and Kaya exchanged glances. Neither had known that word of their partnership had reached the tribal elders. What did she say? Kaya asked softly. She said that her granddaughter had found a white man with an Apache heart. She said that you, Thomas Mitchell, had learned to see with our eyes. She said that together, you might build something that could heal the wounds between our peoples. Mary Crowfeather moved to the center of the room, her weathered hands touching various displays as she spoke. For too long, we have been forced to choose between preserving our culture and surviving in the white world. Our young people leave the reservation because they see no future here, and when they go, they often lose connection to who they are. She turned to face them directly. But what you have built here offers a third path. A way for our culture to thrive, while also engaging with the broader world. A way for our young people to be proud of their heritage, while also being prepared for their future. Robert nodded. The council has voted. We approve of this cultural center, with conditions. Thomas felt his knees go weak with relief, but he forced himself to listen carefully to what came next. First, Robert continued. The tribal council will designate a cultural liaison, who will review all programs and materials to ensure they remain appropriate. Second, a percentage of all proceeds must go to educational programs on the reservation. Third, any expansion of the center's mission must be approved by the council in advance. Those conditions are more than fair, Kaya said immediately. We welcome the oversight and the partnership. There's one more thing, Mary Crowfeather said. We want to offer you both something. A ceremony. A formal recognition of the bridge you have built between our worlds. Thomas looked confused. I don't understand. An adoption ceremony, Robert explained. You have shown that you can honor our ways while remaining true to your own. We would like to make you an honorary member of our tribe, with all the responsibilities that entails. Thomas felt tears spring to his eyes. I don't know what to say. I'm deeply honored, but I don't want to take something that should belong to people who were born to it. You misunderstand, Mary Crowfeather said with a gentle smile. This is not about taking, this is about giving. You have given us respect, partnership, and hope for a future where our cultures can coexist. We want to give you a place in our family. The ceremony took place 3 weeks later, under the same stars that had watched over the sacred spring, where Thomas first met Ayana Black Horse. The entire tribal community gathered, creating a circle around a fire that seemed to connect earth to sky. Thomas wore traditional Apache clothing that Kaya had helped him prepare, feeling both honored and nervous about representing something so much larger than himself. As the ceremony began, he was struck by the solemnity of the moment. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, but a sacred commitment that would bind him to this community for life. When it came time for him to speak, Thomas found himself thinking about the path that had led him here. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely rancher whose biggest concern was tracking down a mountain lion. Now he was standing in a circle of people who had welcomed him as family, preparing to make vows that would change his life forever. I promise to honor the trust you've placed in me, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. I promise to use whatever knowledge you share with me to build understanding, not to exploit or appropriate. I promise to stand with you as family, to celebrate your joys and share your sorrows. As the fire danced and the drums echoed across the desert, Thomas felt something shift inside him. He was no longer just Thomas Mitchell, the rancher. He was Sasatso, the one who sees clearly, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of trust. After the ceremony, as the community celebrated with food and stories and traditional dances, Kaya pulled him aside. There's something I need to tell you, she said, and something in her voice made his heart skip a beat. What is it? The cultural center has been more successful than we dreamed. We've had inquiries from universities, from other tribal communities, from people all over the country who want to learn from what we've built. That's wonderful, Thomas said, though he sensed there was more. The Smithsonian wants to feature our work in a national exhibition about cultural preservation. They want to bring our story to millions of people. Thomas felt a surge of pride, mixed with anxiety. What do you think? I think it's an opportunity to do exactly what grandmother always dreamed of, to show the world that indigenous cultures aren't relics of the past, but living, breathing communities with wisdom the modern world desperately needs. But it's also scary. Success brings scrutiny. Fame brings people who might not have the right intentions. We'll need to be even more careful about protecting what's sacred while sharing what can heal. Thomas took her hands in his. We'll figure it out together, the same way we've figured out everything else. Together, Kaya agreed. And in that simple word, Thomas heard the promise of a future he couldn't have imagined just months before. As the celebration continued around them, Thomas thought about the young Apache woman who had faced down a mountain lion with nothing but a burning branch and fierce determination. That woman had become his teacher, his partner, his bridge to a world he never knew he needed to understand. And somewhere in the stars above, he felt the presence of an old woman who had seen this future in the flames of a sacred fire, who had known that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in fighting your battles alone, but in learning to trust someone else to stand beside you. The fire that had started with Kaya's brave defense had become something larger, light that could guide others across the bridges they were still building, one careful step at a time. The story of courage, understanding, and the bridges we build between different worlds shows us that sometimes the most unexpected partnerships can create the most beautiful legacies. If this journey moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of human connection across all boundaries. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found understanding in the most unexpected places? And remember, the courage to see clearly and build bridges starts with each one of us.